This video is for entertainment purposes only, and sometimes I say that grudgingly. Thank you for visiting my channel once again, and if you're new, welcome. Please do not forget to press the subscribe button, give a thumbs up for like, leave a comment, and please do share. Now, this is the 8th video of a series of videos on the playbook of supremacist ideology and practices. This is the second to last one, the 9th one I will do, and that will be the last one actually. And then we move on to a series on slavery that has been with us from man's advent on earth, and that has been equal opportunity in every society that we can think of. And we learned quite a bit. It's quite a bit to learn. It will be like traveling around the world and going through a time machine, actually, when I get to that one. Now, as I said, I would be speaking a bit about the band-aid that I'm wearing on my forehead. Just a little bit about it. And normally it is the message that I'm giving that is important and not me. It's not about me. However, this ties in with reincarnation and something quite remarkable, because when we're dealing with, the world through the eyes of the soul, we have things that seem a little bit impossible, but really they're not impossible and they're not improbable. They happen, and that's part of our reality and what I call the true reality, which is the spiritual world. Now, before I continue, and forgive once again, when I do my videos, I usually do 2 in a row, and then I upload them for different times. That's how I work. I don't do them one at a time and then, a couple of days later I do another one. I just like doing 2 in a row. So forgive my challenged throat once again. Before I begin our discussion, let me introduce myself. My name is Winifred Davis. I don't think I have to read to remember my name, but who knows, maybe sometimes I might. However, I like to read and I gesticulate a lot. I use my hands a lot. That's just me. It's always been me from I was a little child. Now, as I said once again, my name is Winifred Davis. I've been a shaman, psychic medium, a traditional and spiritual counselor and healer for the past almost 38 years in another couple of months. I'm also an author, essayist, poet, and a former spoken word movement performer. Now, I subscribe to no religion, and when I say I subscribe to no religion, I mean I subscribe to no religion. I believe in universal justice and truth. With the imposter justice of man, that's what I call it. There's an exception to every rule. But with universal justice, there are no exceptions to its rules. And the truth, there's no my side, your side. The truth stands unopposed, and there is only one truth. Objective truth, there is only one truth. Not 10, not 20, not your truth and not my truth, or our truth and their truth. One truth. Now, my conscience, or I should say my duty is only to my conscience. And my conscience is the light that I was given at creation to guide the free will I was also given. That conscience, that light, is what links me back to the Creator. That's what makes me responsible for my own actions. That's what makes me accountable for the well-being of my soul. And I cannot blame anyone. I cannot blame a general, my parents, my king, my country, the bully, a demon, or a devil for anything that I do or say. That conscience of which I speak, each of us was given a conscience, the light to guide a free will that each of us, not just me and not just some, but all of us, was given at creation. And that is the time before the mist of time. Now, I'm not here to lead anyone, and I do not want anyone to lead me. I'm not here to convert anyone. So I'm not here to lead anyone. I'm not here to convert anyone. Each man must evolve according to his own light. I'm just a messenger, a vessel. And as all other messengers on this earth, I am an imperfect messenger. But because I am an imperfect messenger doesn't mean that I should be advocating harming others, doing harm. That's a travesty when we give the title of imperfect messenger to those who do nothing but harm. We might commit spiritual mistakes, but we do not harm other people. And we never, ever advocate harming other people. And now, imperfect messenger, as I discussed before, is what many Christians use an excuse when they support incorrect deeds, abominations, and travesties against their fellow human beings. Now, as I said, I'm a messenger and I deliver messages. Well, who are the messages from? I said messages, messenger, messages. Who are the messages from? I'm just a vessel. They are from the collective. Collective? Well, the collective is comprised of members of the higher hierarchies, including the archangels and my many guides. Each of us has the capability, has the ability, and can communicate with the archangels if we choose to. So when I say that, I'm not saying that I'm special. I'm not. Well, I guess I am special. Each of us is indeed special. Now, these messages are very brutal at times. They're harsh because they're the truth. They force us to look into our mirror of self-reflection, and believe me, many times the image, the reflection that we see in that mirror is not very pretty. I know that. Now, I've been and traveled many a mile in many different shoes throughout my many, many, many arduous lifetimes. I am a rescue soul. Many of us are rescue souls. But I've also committed incorrect deeds. And based on those incorrect deeds, arduous lifetimes and expiation, I was called to a mission because I had the skill set for this particular mission. I satisfied the job description, and each of us have different job descriptions that we satisfy. So it's not that I'm saying I'm special. And this is, I agreed to it. This is what I chose, and I have done what I'm doing right here in many of my past lives. Now, I will get into that a little bit more, spend about 15 minutes discussing a little bit of that, because that's sort of like a prelude to my upcoming book. Now, please do not freely interpret what I say. Say exactly what I say, because believe me, when I get my messages, some of them are just verbatim. Others I have to write and in a way interpret. If I do not do it exactly, but it's a mixed bag. If I do not do it exactly, it doesn't flow, and it makes no sense. I can't write. I have to just go along and do it. As I said, some of the messages are particularly verbatim, and I have to put them verbatim, right? So if you do not understand something, please feel free to leave a question below in the comments, or email me. My email is listed below as well. Now, it is with moral clarity, and I hate to use the word moral because it's so, no way subjective, I suppose. But for lack of a better word, it is with moral clarity that I speak, and I cannot put what I think in there, right? With moral clarity based on my experiences in this lifetime and in my many past lives. So it is with moral clarity that I speak. Once again, remember, I am far from perfect. Now, if I say the sky is blue, I mean it's blue. And even though I say it's the sky and it's blue, I didn't say sky blue, because sometimes the sky is not even sky blue. I didn't say marine blue. I didn't say navy blue. I said blue that encompasses all shades of blue. And if I say that a tiny fish is swimming in a small aquarium, please do not freely interpret, because when we do, one interpretation leads to another. We end up with a big whale in a vast ocean. The whale is not even a fish, it's a mammal. And the small aquarium is certainly not a vast ocean. Now, I started this channel to discuss the fact, I keep saying theory, the fact, or the truth rather, sorry. Oh my goodness, I need to read, right? To discuss the truth that is reincarnation and its many facts. And I call out injustice when I see it, and I couldn't care less who you are. Doesn't give anyone, what I say, the excuse for bigotry. Now, at times, I will discuss at length current events because it's very relevant to the truth that is reincarnation and its many facts, and the subject that I might be discussing at the moment. This is a very special, what I call cup runneth over, period of greater transition that only happen ever so often. Indeed, it is. It feels like end times, Revelation, Apocalypse, Armageddon, but it really isn't. There are always smaller ones happening, and this one is one of the few that happens, every so often. But it's not. We will go on. Now, please do not forget the children. All the civilians, but especially the children and babies in Gaza. There's no peace there, even though, we have all these phony peace and ceasefires where Israel, the supremacists that it is, says, you cease, I fire. anytime you do as I say. I don't have to abide by any rules, any agreements, but you do. You are beneath me. It's getting worse by the day. Starvation, not enough aid, it's going even further down. Disease, no shelter. Even kids getting water vaporized, going to swim. It's hot in the ocean. Well, just shoot them. They're not human beings. You shouldn't do that to animals either. If you lived in Nazi Germany, you'd end up in the concentration camp for that. Don't forget Lebanon, what they're doing to South Lebanon, another Gaza, and the treason of the Lebanese president and prime minister. Shame, shame, shame. No wonder Hezbollah is needed to drive out the invaders. And can't say, well, they're only Shia in the south. No, they're Christians. They're Sunnis as well. That's Lebanon. You cannot give it away for whatever reason. And Iran. The cancer hospital has now become a second cancer hospital for children. That's America. Let us not forget all the children and babies everywhere in this world in zones of conflict. Let us not forget the children of the perpetrators, like Israel, because they also suffer. Unfortunately, chances are they'll probably teach those children to follow in the nonsense that they do. But through the eyes of the soul, we know that doesn't have to be so. I mustn't forget any child anywhere, especially in zones of conflict. It is our duty to take care of each and every one of them, caught in the middle of adults and their forever wars. Once again, this video is for entertainment purposes only. Now, today we're going to debunk supremacists with contemporaries. And I'll explain what that means in a minute. But I'm going to just take a couple of minutes to just talk about this band-aid on my forehead. Now, as I've mentioned many times, that I'm working on a book about how to reclaim past lives. It's sort of like a manual. It's different than a manual. It's informative, and that's one of my tasks in this lifetime. Now, I've done informational writings for thousands of years in different lifetimes, in different masks, male, female, Mesopotamian, Egyptian, American. I've done healing. I've been a healer. I've used all these skill sets, a diviner, a historian, a housewife, a warrior. I've been awful, and I've been okay. I've suffered a lot. I've lost my head a couple of times. I've been hanged. I've been a hobo, a wanderer. I've been a priest. I've been a monk, a beheaded monk at that. I've been queen. I've been, what would I say? I've lived in the Arctic. I've lived in the desert. I've lived in the Mediterranean. I've lived in England. I've lived in India. I've lived in Jamaica. I'm from Jamaica. So I've been black. I've been white. I've been brown. I've been all races and ethnicities and even people who no longer exist. And so when I got on this journey of reincarnation, and so that now I'm writing about it, this is my task, and this is part of the ancient knowledge. And as I wrote this book, and I'm almost finished, and I thought I would have finished months ago, but in books such as these, it's only when my guides say you're finished, you're finished. So I could talk all I want to talk and have my wishes. And as my son would say, stop driving yourself crazy and saying that you're going to finish it by next week, because you know that you're not. I have to finish when they say it's finished, when I'm writing books such as these. If I'm writing, other books, if it be books on Jamaican proverbs, for example, I can set my own deadline, but not with these. And so I asked the question a couple weeks ago, do I have any more lifetimes to discover that's relevant to the topic that, I will be discussing in this upcoming book? Is there anything else I'm missing? Well, they said to me, well, how are you going to write this book about reclaiming past lives when you haven't mentioned, you're supposed to mention the story of how you got on this journey? Now, as a little girl, I had I don't know, should I say a nodule, something on my neck. You could feel it, even though it's kind of still there, but not as pronounced. And, I used to hear, I was maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I used to hear the elders in my family saying, oh my God, they're worrying. I hope it's not cancer. Maybe we should take her to the doctor. And one day I turned and I said, oh, maybe I was hanged in another lifetime. Where that came from, I do not know, but I said it. And they laughed. Anyhow, they never did follow it up. So much the better. And I indeed was hanged. So I was going through all of this. Didn't know. And then I was obsessed with duty and justice. And I couldn't figure out why it's going on for decades. And one day, I can't remember where I heard about it. No, yes, it was an elderly lady. Mentioned something about regression, past life regression. And so I found where I could have one. And this was a regression therapist in Ontario, Canada. And I went, he lived in a small town, and I went to see him. He had a bookstore. When in the bookstore, I looked at him and I just said, oh, did you have a past life in China? And he looked at me, because here I was coming to find out stuff. And he said, yes, as a matter of fact, I did. That was my happiest lifetime. So anyhow, I proceeded downstairs, and he did whatever, and I got into it. And I found myself on a spacecraft. Or, no, I shouldn't say a spacecraft, a craft. So it could have been a ship. And I was pacing with my hands behind my back. I was a tall man. And I had two things on one thing on each shoulder, like epaulette or something like that. The shoulders stood out. And well, in this lifetime, I have broad shoulders for a female, they would say, but that's all nonsense. And he had black, wavy hair. It was more like in a ponytail. And if I should describe my physical attributes. It would be more like I was someone from the Andes. And I was pacing back and forth, wondering, and sitting also at the where you have the control panel of that craft, were two beings. One had flaming red hair and the greenest of eyes, and the other one was blonde. And what I'm hearing is, no, we're not taking them. And I'm saying, we have to go. We had to leave. There was an emergency. And it said the word Atlantis. I'd never heard of Atlantis before. And I said, oh, I'm just going into that. And we can't take them. They're not our kind. Yes, that's the word. They are not of our kind. I hated doing it. But we took off and left those who were not of our kind. And that's what the elders were saying. I left it at that. I got through. I didn't want to go further. And it wasn't until much later, years later actually, and so that was the beginning of my journey into reincarnation. Yes, not all shaman, most do not go into reincarnation, and that is where, that's my specialty now. That's my job now, because this is the time for it. And it was some years later that I realized, and that's where duty and justice, I should get back to that. That's where it began, because that's what I wanted to know, why I am obsessed with duty and justice. And that's been a recurring theme through all my past lives. And believe me, I've gone into many of them, not just by myself, but with other past life readers. And of course, one who was very close to me, since passed on, but I won't get into that now, who happened to have been my husband in another lifetime, a very consequential lifetime, but I didn't know that then. I said he knew after seeing me a couple of times, but of course it was not his duty to tell me, as he told me then. Not everything could be revealed at that time. I will get into all of that in the book. And that's when I now, some years later, would find out that the craft, the ship on which that we left on, was leaving, because there was all this experimentation and the explosions, which a few years ago I actually saw, and the blue flames of that explosion, and left all those people. They call them hybrid souls. Those were the first people or souls who came and interfered in the processes, and so as rescuers were come to save them. But then again, we got corrupted, if you want to put it that way. And so they were not our kind. That was supremacist ideology and practices, and I didn't like it. And so that has disturbed me. Even when I was at my worst in other lifetimes, justice, duty should be to your conscience. That's where it began, and that's why my guide said, well, you are not finished the book because you haven't said anything about that lifetime, what got you onto this, and how it was revealed. That was not my first lifetime on earth, by the way. Now, getting to this. Now, so I said years later, I would find out that when we took off, it was a whole host of boats or ships. And those were the last set, because as rulers, you're going to be leaving. And I was part of a ruling family. No, as I said, I've been poor. I've starved to death in other lifetimes. I've been a wanderer in different lifetimes. So, we all like to think, well, we were rulers when we talk about past lives, but no, doesn't matter. Doesn't matter what you were, it's what you did. But anyhow, I was of the ruling class. And so that has haunted me. So we were the last to take off, and we left all those people. And of course, they perished. And there was a lot of flooding. And one of the beings was sitting at the control panel. He was actually in charge of, irrigation and controlling floods and whatever before all the mess happened. And that was my brother, and would travel with me in many, many different lifetimes as husband, brother, rival, sister, you name it. And the boat, the one that I was in, that crash landed and cracked my skull. We crash landed in Norway, what we now know as Norway. And my skull was cracked, but I survived nonetheless. And we built a new settlement there, actually, because we're very skilled, very knowledgeable in a lot of things. And there's a mural that we did, detailing some of the events that happened. Now I've gone and, that's one of the things that, let me finish with this cracked skull. So normally, okay, when we're born with the fontanelles, right? So you have the posterior and then you have the anterior, which is that little soft spot. Some people call it the mole, that little soft spot that you could actually sometimes see beating, and that's in little babies. And up until the posterior closes first, and then the anterior here is the last to close. Usually close, I think by the time you're like 2 years old, 3 years old, it's closed. Well, mine never closed, which once again, I had so many little different things. My mom always talked about it. You could still see it beating, and it never closed until I was in my 40s. After I found out what happened about the cracked skull. And that's why I stopped when I was going through that regression therapy. I stopped right there. I just knew that we left the people that we should have to, because there was room on board, and I didn't go further because I suppose it was just horrible to, crack skull. So anyhow, about this week, actually, I'm talking to you now, making this video on Friday, July 17th. Is it? Yes, July 17th. So on Monday, I had a fall. And actually, I just written about that cracked skull couple days before, because I went into and I completely forgotten about it. And so there were more information that I had to get as well. So I had to go back into the energies again and get that information and find out certain things and back it up with archaeological evidence. Even though they say Atlantis didn't exist, it did. Back it up with archaeological evidence, and that's one of the things you say when you have certain life, and you can back things up with archaeological evidence. And I found out a lot of stuff. Anyhow, Monday I had a fall, and it was horrible. And actually, sort of like I went back into Atlantis, into Norway, or what we now call Norway. And I heard my head went into the corner of a wall. where you have the metal on the drywall to prevent, so that it's not soft and you could smush the wall in, so it keeps it firm, right? Into it. And I thought I was a goner. And no, I'm a shaman, but accidents do happen. And I went into that wall and I heard the loudest crack. It shook the room, and the crack was so loud. It's like when you take an axe and you would cut like something dry, like a skull, and you crack that. It was so loud. If you were outside on the street and one end of the house to downstairs at the other end, you could hear that crack. And there's a mirror in front of where I fell, where I slipped. And I said, my God, oh my God. Because I thought that was it, that it took me back to the skull being cracked in the middle. And that's the first time I was able to, and I said, this is what it was like. I was taken back and I felt it. But fortunately, it wasn't. So that's why I'm telling you this right now. That was my experience, and that's past lives coming, and sometimes that happens. And I'll get more into details in my book with regards to that. And as for some of the facts in Norway, they have found murals. It's a wall mural. When we built that new settlement, wall murals, they have found wall murals, and they always find them near bodies, near the bodies of water in Norway. And I would imagine in other parts of Scandinavia, because I would imagine there might be other vessels. So, you have them, they're as old as, like 8,000 years old. Who knows, maybe older. And there's one in particular, but I'm still getting some people would say the download of what have you. But I couldn't get into that lifetime past a certain point because the horror of having your skull cracked. And by the way, my skull was also cracked in Odessa by the being who was the soul, who was my mother in this lifetime. I was 16 years old then. So that is a see-through line coming back, where one would say that your head is one of the things to prove certain and different lifetimes that you've had. And yes, you were not mistaken that you had, because these things can happen, and we call them calling cards. So I will end this here. There was something else I was supposed to say with regards to that, but I said let me deal with the band-aid here. So that will all be detailed in my book, and that was the lifetime that they said, no, you aren't finished yet. And after that one, just like 3 or 4 days ago, they showed me another one, but I will name that in my book. But that now was the beginning of one of the historical lifetime that we can actually go back into through the temporal lens and actually have the archaeological and historical evidence to prove such a lifetime. And sometimes we need to have those. And because I was tasked with proving the fact that is the truth, that is reincarnation and its many facts, so thrown in there with the anonymous lifetimes in which oftentimes we expiate more and we advance higher up the ladder and faster than when we are given great power. And of course, we abuse that great power. So those, you can use those to validate some of the lifetimes. And sometimes we try to claim unto ourselves lifetimes, because the person was famous. Like there have been so many Nefertitis, people who claim to be Nefertiti, but then there are steps you need to take to know, is that really true? And when you claim past lives, you have got to take the good and the bad, because Nefertiti, she and Akhenaten, they did grave mistakes. Yeah, they committed grave mistakes. But anyhow, let's move on now and finish supremacist ideology, the playbook of supremacist ideology and practices. Debunking supremacists with contemporaries. English, right? Or I should say Enlightenment philosophers like Comte de Buffon and Immanuel Kant, in their andro-Eurocentric, so it's a male, and Eurocentric, like European supremacy, male supremacy, believed that non-white people were subhuman. And according to Buffon, Comte de Buffon, the Negro, quote, the Negro is man, not animal, only because white and black can procreate together. So if you take a Negro, according to him, a black man, and a white man, the child, their issue, their offspring, will look like a human being. And that's the only reason why a black man, a Negro, you'd consider him a man rather than an animal, but of course he's a lesser man. Now, Immanuel Kant declared that being of low intellect, even when the Negro is given freedom, he has never presented anything great in art or science or any other praiseworthy quality. So, as a black man, we cannot appreciate, we cannot contribute anything in art or science or praiseworthy, anything, that's praiseworthy, that shows that we are refined human beings. Thomas Jefferson, the frenemy of John Adams. It's fascinating reading their letters and following their relationship. Absolutely fascinating. And just a little tidbit. Jefferson, of course, was born, to money. And he inherited the wealth of his wife's family as well. But he was a spender. He liked all the refined things. He was a brilliant man. Intelligence-wise, knowledge-wise. But his character left a lot to be desired. And he died because he was such a spender. He died in debt, $100,000. I don't know, that's worth some millions of dollars in today's currency. Whereas John Adams, who was of a lowly enough beginning, he died $100,000. He had assets of that. He was valued, worth that. So imagine that. And they died on the same day in 1926 on July 4th, America's birthday. Just thought I would throw that in there. But they were great frenemies. Now, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States of America, he was a slave owner. And remember, John Adams, he and his son, the sixth president of the United States of America, John Adams was the second president. They were the only ones of the first 12 founding fathers who did not own slaves, because John Adams said it was a contagion, slavery, on the human spirit. He was dead set against slavery. Now, he believed, this is Thomas Jefferson, that black people were not fully human, and found nothing wrong with enslaving his own children, who he sired with his wife's mixed race half-sister, Sally Hemings. And he started his relationship with her when she was a mere girl. Well, you know, back then the ages were different and whatever, but she was a mere child. You know, I mean, Abigail Adams, John Adams' wife, she thought, because she was the one who actually took Sally Hemings along with one of Jefferson's daughter to France, because Sally Hemings was going to look after these children, Jefferson's children. His wife Martha had died, you know, and so he, Abigail, because she and John, they wrote a lot. You know, they were diarists, right? And they wrote a lot of letters. She thought that this mere child cannot even take care of herself, much less to take care of other children. How preposterous, but, well, those were the times, right? So, in any case, these men, like Jefferson, Kant, and Comte de Buffon, they were all supremacists. Had they truly read the black hole, and we covered that in the Islamic civilization, in European history between 300 AD and the beginning of the Renaissance, so that's like about 1,000 years or more, they would have known of Zaryab, that dynamo, that cultural dynamo. No guitar, you know, no Zaryab, we wouldn't have any guitar. No Zaryab, no fine dining. No Zaryab, no bangs. This was the Muslim, call him polymath if you want, who brought chess into Europe. It also came via Persia, but it's originally from India. He brought it into Al-Andalus in Moorish Spain, and fine dining, replacing all those clunky goblets, Roman goblets. You know, he brought crystals and even tablecloth to cover your table. You know, he, how would I put it, designed, you know, spoons and different things and all these fancy things that all the supposed rich people talk about and do. Thank you to Zaryab. And by the way, Zaryab, doesn't matter really, he was from Iraq. He was half black, and well, they don't know whether it would be half Kurdish, half Arab, or half Persian. And he also, and as I said, without him, no guitar. Asparagus, Zaryab. He brought toothbrush, toothpaste. He taught men that, well, yes, you can shave. You can even bathe twice a day. Fashion houses. Fashion. You know, change your fashion. Spring, summer, fall, winter. You wanted all of that. You needed to go to Al-Andalus. He brought in the Jewish physicians from North Africa. And he was a cultural dynamo. Okay, so they forget all these things. They don't know all these things. And all the stuff that the Muslim scholars, like ophthalmology, they took the Greek philosophy, they continued it. This was the time Europe was going through its dark ages. You talk about the empiricism of science, the Muslim scholars. But then we can also go back to ancient Egypt, back into the old kingdom. And yes, they conducted experiments. They wrote down their observation. They had data and they came to conclusions, as opposed to Aristotle. Didn't believe in doing any experiments, for example. When it comes to mathematics, Al-Khwarizmi, no Al-Khwarizmi, guess what? No computers, no computer science. In different areas of medicine. And then, of course, you had, for example, Maimonides, who was Jewish. But it was in this, during the Islamic civilization and the different caliphates, that he as well did all that he was doing. And so these white supremacists, Kant, Jefferson, and Buffon, they forgot. So, moving on. As I said, the fine crystals and fine dining that Thomas Jefferson so loved, he loved fine dining and crystals and all of that stuff and French cuisine. He might not have known, but for that half animal, Zaryab. Thomas Jefferson, although he crafted the Declaration of Independence, he did not practice what he preached, as Benjamin Banneker so rightly pointed out to him, and I'll get into Banneker later. He was a black man. He had his calendar, and he helped also to, when they were designing Washington, the city there of Washington, he did some of the groundwork with a cousin of George Washington. Okay, some people say that he was the architect. No, he wasn't the architect, but he did, you know, like with the surveying and stuff like that. And was he as well. He was self-educated, very smart man, and he made calendars and what have you. So going back now, Thomas Jefferson, although he crafted the Declaration of Independence, he did not practice what he preached, as Benjamin Banneker so rightly pointed out to him. It is unfortunate, and he wrote him a letter. I don't know, don't know if I have this in here, but it's in my book nonetheless. It is unfortunate that Thomas Jefferson did not take the inspiration that he got from Cyrus the Great. Bill of Rights, Cyrus the Great of the Great Persia. One step further and do as Cyrus the Great did and free all his slaves. It wasn't just the Jews that Cyrus the Great, when he went into Babylon, that he ordered be freed. It was all people who were not free, all captives. Alas, we only take from history that which serves our purposes rather than absorb all the good lessons that history teaches us. Two of these men, briefly, who were gifted to their owners. Okay, we'll briefly look at two gifted men. Okay, who they were gifted as, what would we say, as pets. They were black men gifted as pets to their owners. These black men who were gifted as pets to their owners, just imagine the audacity, to their owners, were contemporaries. They were living during the time of Kant, Buffon, and Jefferson. And in the case of European Buffon and Kant, it is more than likely that they would have heard of at least one of the black men who lived in Europe. So let us begin. Abram Petrovich Gannibal. We could say Abram, okay? So I will say Abram, okay? I think that's how they would say it in Russian. Abram Petrovich Gannibal. Taken from Africa, and his birthday, by the way, 1696 to 1781. He was taken from Africa via the Ottoman Empire slave market at Smyrna, modern-day Izmir, and was gifted to Peter the Great. He was baptized in 1705 with Peter the Great as his godfather, raising him in like manner. An intelligent young man, Abram was sent to France, where he was educated at the best schools in the arts, sciences, and warfare. A polyglot, which means he could speak many languages. Fluently. He excelled in geometry and mathematics. He studied military engineering, becoming a master engineer as well as a fireworks expert. Gannibal would eventually become the chief engineer of the Russian army and general-in-chief in 1759, a prominent member of the court of Empress Elizabeth. That's the daughter of Peter the Great. Gannibal was made superintendent of Reval, present-day Tallinn, Estonia. Abram Petrovich Gannibal was the great-grandfather of Alexander Sergeyevich Pushkin, poet, playwright, novelist, founder of Russian literature, and great champion of the Russian language. Now, we go on to the second one, who would have been a contemporary of Kant, for example. His name was Anton Wilhelm Amo. Anton Wilhelm Amo, an 18th century Akan, comes from Ghana, and German, because that's where he grew up, polyglot as well, spoke many languages, was also a legal scholar, natural philosopher, was also gifted, was given as a gift to Prussian nobles, Dukes Augustus William and Ludwig Rudolph of Brunswick. Amo was a professor at the universities of Halle, Jena, and Wittenberg, whose account of the mind, according to Mainz, that's one of the references, should be seen as a development of Descartes' theory, and who, based on evidence, I think, therefore I am. That's attributed to René Descartes. Not only supervised, but also co-wrote Johannes Theodosius Meiner's dissertation, Philosophical Disputation, containing distinct ideas of what belongs either to the mind or to our living and organic body. Don't worry about that long title and what it is. But it's very important, okay? It's very important in terms of philosophy during that time and even now. Okay, it was right up there. Okay, one of the greatest philosophical questions and answers that, theories, okay, at that time. So this African who was gifted to these two brothers was a professor, and he wrote and oversaw the dissertation or something. He co-wrote this dissertation. He was supposed to be the director of the student who did this study. Amo, he returned to Ghana in 1747, where he died 6 years later in 1753. And despite Amo's laudable work and presence, neither Kant nor Buffon seem to have been aware of their contemporary Anton Wilhelm Amo, ex-slave, multilingual black philosopher at the universities of Jena and Halle in Germany. And they were contemporaries because Kant, let me see here, Kant was around in, he was born 1724, he died 1804. Wilhelm left Germany, and Kant was an adult then, left Germany in 1740s, right? 1750s, I should say. Now, the next one is Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges. Neither were they, it would appear, aware of this man whose name and reputation spread beyond the borders of France. And I've spoken about him before. It spread beyond the borders of France, in Europe, and across the ocean to America. The charismatic and handsome, it's like this guy was, he had everything going for him. He was a polymath. He was a polyglot. He was an athlete. He was a military strategist. He just had everything going. He had so many talents. So Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, a polymath indeed, an accomplished composer, Paris leading violin virtuoso, athlete, skater, equestrian, master swordsman, marksman, the best in France, military leader, and an abolitionist. Because of racism, he has been called the Black Mozart. But in reality, it was Mozart who should be known as the White Chevalier, as many historians now agree. Boulogne was one of the first composers to engage with writing string quartets. In fact, according to Smith, one of the references, Boulogne was a main figure in the history of classical music, being one of the forefront names in the development of its many strengths, musically and stylistically. John Adams, a founding father and the second president of the United States, he spent a lot of time in France, as did Jefferson and Benjamin Franklin during that era, sums it up in an entry in his diary. If you want to know what happened during all that time, check John Adams' diary. Fascinating. He didn't miss a beat, and he wrote every single day. Arthur Lee, and quote, this is his diary, May 17th, 1779. Arthur Lee gave us an account of he put St. George at Paris, a mulatto man, son of a former governor of Guadeloupe by a Negro woman, but he wasn't a governor. His father wasn't a governor. He has a sister married to a farmer general. He is the most accomplished man in Europe in riding, running, shooting, fencing, dancing, music. He will hit the button, any button, on the coat or waistcoat of the greatest masters. He will hit a crown piece, that's money, coin, in the air with a pistol ball. Arthur Lee, by the way, who reported this to John Adams, and then when John Adams went and saw himself. Arthur Lee was a physician, abolitionist, diplomat, and lawyer in colonial Virginia in North America. He helped negotiate and sign the 1778 Treaty of Alliance with France. Georges Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, father of Joseph Boulogne, was not a governor of Guadeloupe, as I said. He was a settler and slave owner. There is no doubt that Thomas Jefferson would have heard of Georges Boulogne because he was in France at that time, because he, John Adams, as I said, and Benjamin Franklin lived in Paris conducting America's business during this time. Now let's get to Benjamin Banneker. That's the man who wrote to Jefferson, the black man who lived in Maryland during that time, self-taught. Benjamin Banneker, we might note here, like his European contemporary Immanuel Kant, Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States of America, held the same, as we discussed, racist view of black people, as attested to in this quote from the Georgetown Weekly Ledger in 1791. Ellicott is attended by Benjamin Banneker, an Ethiopian whose abilities as a surveyor and an astronomer, this was Benjamin Banneker, clearly prove that Mr. Jefferson's concluding that race of men were void of mental endowments was without foundation. So Benjamin Banneker, an astronomer, farmer, naturalist, mathematician, was mostly self-taught. Using his knowledge of astronomy, he created almanacs and assisted Andrew Ellicott, who was the cousin to George Washington. He actually was a Quaker. Andrew Ellicott was a Quaker. He actually gave a lot of books to Benjamin Banneker throughout the years. So Banneker assisted Andrew Ellicott in the initial survey to establish the borders of the District of Columbia. Accompanying a handwritten copy of his almanac was a letter to Jefferson. This is what Banneker wrote in 1791, in which Banneker highlighted the hypocrisy of Jefferson and other American slave owners when Jefferson compared British rule to its colonies to an intolerable state of servitude. Quote, this is what Banneker wrote Jefferson when he sent him a copy of his calendar that he had made. How pitiable is it to reflect that although you were so fully convinced of the benevolence of the Father of mankind and of his equal and impartial distribution of those rights and privileges which he had conferred upon them, that you should at the same time be found guilty of that most criminal act which you professedly detested in others with respect to yourselves. So here he was talking about the intolerable state of servitude that Americans, white Americans of course, had to put up with King George and England, and that's one of the reasons they wanted to free themselves from the tyranny of British rule. But yet still, Banneker says, what hypocrisy, yet still you have your fellow human beings that you don't find anything wrong in enslaving. Now, I'm going to go on to Francis Williams. Now, the last example that I will cite, and these were contemporaries of these supremacists, Count de Buffon and Jefferson. Francis Williams, he was born in Jamaica. He was Jamaican. Now, the last example I will cite here is the Jamaican polymath, jurist, poet, scholar, mathematician, and astronomer. Francis William, born 1690, he died in 1770. A contemporary of Sir Isaac Newton, right? Laws of gravity, right? Isaac Newton, English, from Stamford in Lincolnshire. Williams had not only witnessed, but also computed the trajectory of Halley's Comet over Jamaica in 1759. At a meeting attended by Newton and Edmund Halley in 1716, Williams was proposed as a fellow of the Royal Society in England, but was later rejected by a small committee on account of his complexion. X-ray and high-resolution scans of a painting, the earliest known commissioned by a black person in the Western world, of Williams celebrating their status as an intellectual, confirmed his achievement and refuted the vicious racist attacks propagated by colonial jurists and slave and plantation owner Edward Long and racist, Eurocentric supremacists. He was another one here. Enlightenment, another one here. David Hume, I think he's Scottish, who felt that Williams, a black man, was out of his place and depth and presumptuous to command a painting that showed him as a Georgian gentleman and intellectual. It was indeed fortuitous. It was good foresight on the part of Williams to command such a painting. If not, an important part of his legacy would have been lost, because racists and supremacists would have been left to define him. But he made certain he defined himself when he commanded that picture that be painted of him and put all the stuff that he had observed with the measurements and everything into it, because he also computed the trajectory of the comet Halley in 1759. In 2024, scans and x-rays done of the painting by historian Farah Dahobuala, okay, so let me get that right, Haboiwala, okay, so Farah Haboiwala, forgive me for butchering that, revealed and confirmed Williams' computations and observations of the trajectory of Halley Comet over Jamaica in 1759. Williams commissioned the paintings to bear witness to his accomplishment. Nothing he wrote about his intellectual endeavors has ever been found otherwise, because he was, it's recorded, he was a poet as well and a jurist. And according to Dabhoiwala, he is a black man in a white supremacist society. No one thinks it's worth preserving anything by him. And I'll just say something about Williams. Now, he was the son of slaves. This was in Jamaica, 17th century Jamaica. But the slave owner, actually, when he died, he willed the plantation and all the slaves to Francis Williams' parents or his father. Now, Francis Williams, he was not a mulatto or anything. He was an unmixed black man. Okay, his father was, they came from Africa, right? West Africa. Okay, so it's not like a lot of slave owners would leave things to their children that they had with their slave women. So they would do that in Jamaica. Jamaica was, in many ways, an interesting case when it came to certain things during slavery. I write about that in those in the book Thoughts on the Past, Volume 1. Equal opportunity, the mass and equal opportunity. But his father, so he sent him out, he traveled to England and what have you. And it was because of, they knew he was brilliant, obviously. So he was well educated. Because of his black skin, why some people voted in that, the Royal Society. You know, that's where you had like members were Sir Isaac Newton and others, where they wanted to you know, propose him as a fellow. It's like the Paris Opera, when it came time for Chevalier de Saint Georges, when he was elected as director, one of the, and I think he actually had an affair with her, one of the actresses slash singers, whatever, refused. She said she will not be dictated to by a black man. And he was very devastated by the fact, because he was qualified, more than qualified. And he realized then, you know, he knew always that even he was a mulatto, but it didn't stop he was seen as black. And he was, you know, a lot of things went on, and he did spend some time in England, and that's when he got into the abolitionist movement and whatever. And he was also imprisoned at one point, I think by Napoleon. Now that's just going there. So with Francis Williams, so he was, his status was unusual, and at one point he was challenged by one of the English people in slavery Jamaica, and I think to defend himself, he slapped him. And that was another set of stories. But he also did a lot of good. He opened schools and what have you for children of slaves. Now, I'm going to talk about Jesse Owens now. And I think we're just about almost finished. Now, Jesse Owens, some of us might have heard about him and others not. It's a legend. During the Olympics, 1936 Olympics in Berlin, during the time of the Nazis. Before the start of the 1936 Berlin Summer Olympics, Nazi officials expressed their displeasure at the participation of black athletes from America, who they ridiculed and labeled inferior non-humans. That's a quote. The non-humans is quote. When Jesse Owens, a black athlete from America, won 4 Olympic gold medals in track and field at the 1936 Berlin Summer Olympics, he single-handedly crushed Hitler's myth of Aryan supremacy. In the long jump, he beat the German and European champion Lutz Long, who was tall, blonde, and blue-eyed, representing the perfect Aryan. Not only did the story of Jesse Owens shatter the myth of Aryan supremacy, but it highlighted several facts. Long, the German athlete, embraced Owens in the presence of a full stadium. Kudos to him and Hitler. That took courage on Long's part. As a true competitor, he had no problem acknowledging the skill of a fellow athlete who was better than he was. Remember when we spoke about negative exceptionalism in the last video? And I said, as long as you know you've done your best, when you see someone who's better than you, that's their best, embrace them. Embrace them. Do not be envious of them or try to deny them and destroy them. When, okay, so the pictures taken show both men. This is in front of Hitler. This is in front of Nazi Germany, walking hand in hand after Owens' win. When left alone, without the hateful rhetoric and actions of politicians, we will often see the common humanity in each other, just like children. They will just automatically play together. They might, one child might look at the other one because they've never seen, for example, a black child. They've never seen someone with that skin color. That's different. Or the black child will look at the white one. They've never seen someone, but that's okay. That's innocent. That's children, right? They'll just play together and they couldn't care less about anything. Sometimes they'll fight if they're fighting over a toy, but it has nothing to do with, well, you're black and I'm white. No. When left alone, we're human beings, the common humanity in each other. Although the American Olympics did not cave to the demands of the Nazis to replace the black and Jewish athletes on the team, it would appear that perhaps they did cave to some of those demands when U.S. Olympic chairman Avery Brundage replaced the Jewish athletes Sam Stoller and Marty Glickman. It is alleged that they did not want to further embarrass the Nazis, so they took out those two. They would have been on the relay teams. We should never indulge bullies and supremacists, not even one iota. We must always stand for that which is correct, and no form of discrimination is correct. History teaches us that it is only the bully that benefits when we compromise. Nobody else, just the bully. And when we compromise, the bully benefits and he will never stop wanting more until something stops them. Hello, Israel. Hello, the American Manchurian regime. Other black athletes triumphed at the Olympics, including Cornelius Johnson, who not only won the high jump, but set a world record doing it, and the silver went to Dave Alberton. John Woodruff won the gold in the 800 meters, and Archie Williams won gold in the 400 meters. Mac Robinson won silver in the 200 meters, and Robert Metcalf was a double medalist, winning silver in the 100 meters and gold in the 4x100 relay. Black athletes won 14 of the 56 medals, which was 25% of what the entire team won. Could you imagine that? And of 359 members comprising the entire U.S. Olympic team, only 18 of them were black. So 18 members out of 359 were black, right? So that's 5% of that entire team was black, but they won 25% of the medals, of which 8 of them were gold. Black athletes won 1/3 of the total gold medals won by the team. Jesse Owens was an example of triumph in the face of adversity, not only in Nazi Germany, but also in America. The son of sharecroppers and grandson of slaves, Jesse Owens endured respiratory health issues as a child due to the systemic racism that bred inequality and poverty, leading to inadequate shelter, lack of health care, and other privations. Owens also picked cotton as a child. Owens, like his fellow black athletes, triumphed despite the racism at home and triumphed despite the racism abroad. After bringing America glory in the Olympics, he would return, as did the veterans, some of whom gave their lives, to systemic racism, segregation, and gross inequity and inequality at home, where black people were considered inferior and subhuman, with a system that ensured that they created the conditions to make this so, creating reality. Supremacist ideology, as we discuss, they create reality. It's like Israel as well, when they declared that the Palestinians, this was in October 2023, Yoav Gallant, the supposed moderate in Israel, which shows you something is seriously wrong in that place, declared them as human animals. So they set about creating the reality on the ground, the conditions, so that the Palestinians would indeed be labeled human animals. So when you starve people, you dehydrate them, they die from disease, get sick, or they're crippled and maimed. You create those conditions, just like in the Holodomor, right? And in the Gulag, right? And in Leningrad, where people resorted to cannibalism because of the conditions of privation in which they found themselves. Fortunately, the Palestinians did not get to that level. And even in terms of that, they were sharing bread with zoo animals. These are the supposed subhuman animals who will not allow the zoo animals to starve. They share the little they have. And you think about these supremacists, they're so civilized and they starve children and babies. You might get tired of me talking like this, but I'm deeply disturbed when we're cruel, especially to children and babies. Now, as I was saying, Owen's story of bringing glory to a country that does not return that love is the same for BIPOC veterans, as I said. In Germany, black athletes lived in a racially integrated village. And by the way, I like to say that, going back to Joseph Boulogne, Chevalier de Saint-Georges, that his light, it was so bright, his brilliance was so bright that it shone through the darkness, the deepest darkness of racism. They could not stop his light from shining. It was so bright. We might note here that several thousand black people and people of mixed race lived in Germany before World War II. Many entered Germany during the 19th century when Germany had African colonies, and others came from the Caribbean and the rest of the Americas. After Germany's loss in World War I, with its colonies divided between the triumphant European countries, many were left stateless. In the aftermath of World War I and Germany's defeat, the occupation of the Rhineland was imposed and regulated by the articles stipulated in the armistice, the 11th of November 1918. For the Germans, they resented being occupied by other European countries, but it was especially for them, supremacists, humiliating, I should say, that black and brown soldiers were sent as overseers in the Rhineland, who the Germans believed were their inferiors, and that was due to France, sent in, I guess, the Senegalese and the North African soldiers. We must recall that the first genocide of the 20th century was that of the Namaqua and Herero, committed by Germany in its Namibian colony under the command of von Trotta. Germany had learned much from the United States, and Namibia was the training ground for the atrocities it would commit in World War II. So, first genocide of the 20th century, Germany. There are other genocides as well, but the first one for the 20th century. And then it went on again and did the same thing, didn't learn, in World War II. And then now, third strike, the state is one of the greatest enablers, one of the states so complicit in the unfolding genocide of the Palestinian people by Israel. So supposedly, their atonement for what the Nazis did, they have enabled another genocide. And by the way, they recognize the genocide in Namibia grudgingly because the people are black. And well, it took a long time, we might say recent, to recognize the genocide of the Roma Sinti, where upwards of 75 to 80% of the Roma Sinti people were exterminated by the Nazis in what was perhaps the worst camp that even Jews in the concentration camps speak of how horrible the conditions were in the Roman Sinti, or what they call it, the gypsy camp. That's what the Nazis labeled it as. So Germany still has yet to learn. The Germans after World War I, embarked on a propaganda campaign dubbed Black Horror of the Rhine, depicting these African soldiers as barbarians, raping German girls and women. You should see the cartoons that they made in their propaganda posters. In what might be called escalating discrimination, the discrimination would hit its full crescendo. It's like a musical term, you know, when you're up, 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 louder, 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 right? In the late 1930s into the 1940s, Black people could not find employment. Children were mocked and bullied in school until they were banned completely from schools. And there's a wonderful book. I think I'll try to see if it's one of my references. I'll try and list it below, actually, written by I can't remember his first name, Masakoi, or Masakwi. He was one of the Rhineland bastards. The laws that applied to Jews were used against Black people and the Roma Sinti. 386 children, these are the Rhineland bastards, as they call those children, were sterilized. And the doctor who was in charge of the experiments in Namibia after World War I, he was also in charge of this sterilization program. I can't remember his name here, but it's in my book. He was also in charge of that program in World War II. Black people were imprisoned, put in psychiatric hospitals, workhouses, in concentration camps, or disappeared. It is not known how many Black people were imprisoned or made unalive, as there were no census taking them into account. This conflict has shown us that great powers are usually late or absent from the table of justice, as they were in South Africa and Nazi Germany, as was evident with the futile 1943 Anglo-American Bermuda Conference between the Allies concerning the subject of the Jews and their plight in Nazi Germany. The inherently selfish nature of man on a micro level of the individual and on the macro level of nations in this war led to the backroom deals. This war, we're talking now about the Palestinians, as ruminated between the big boys and the big girls as they met in the back room to take advantage of the golden opportunity. You know, when life serves you lemons, you make lemonade. And that's the golden opportunity. And this was when life serves you lemons, make lemonade moment. These powers for October 7th now, 2023, these powers, including some of the Arab and Muslim states, were willing to sacrifice Palestinian people, the Palestinian people, for their self-interests. The conflict was going to be bloody. That's what I wrote back then. Just maybe 2 months after it started, I could see it. My guide showed me them in their back rooms and perhaps verbatim. The conflict, quote, was going to be bloody. Not for the faint of heart, but that was how it had to be. And while the pronouncements from the countless meetings were indeed grand and noble, they were just that. And still, almost 3 years later, continue to be. Few were willing to put tangible efforts into play, put their money where their mouth was. No matter the motives of groups like the Houthis or Ansar Allah, I'll say Ansar Allah, not the Houthis, Ansar Allah, Hezbollah, because the Houthi is it's a family actually, Houthi. It's a family. And some of them are leaders of Ansar Allah, okay? Hezbollah and some in Iraq that could ill afford to do so, to put their money where their mouths were. Yes, there might have been other considerations on the part of, as I said, of some of these groups, but they responded when they saw injustice, and who couldn't? While we do not advocate violence, we note that these groups deemed terrorists and barbaric in their actions vis-a-vis Gaza, and with Iran's retaliatory strikes in Israel in 2024 and in most of those during the 12-day war in June 2025, targeted military infrastructure, while Israel targets hospitals, universities, the shabby tents pitched in mud, incinerating babies, burning the flesh from their bones, and children just playing amidst the destruction or simply standing in line for water. With this evidence, is there any doubt as to who the real terrorists and barbarians are? The great powers, rather than using their weapons and money to stop a genocide being committed in the glaring sun of broad daylight, choose to attack those who try to stand on the right side of history. It was the case of allowing a bully to prey upon the weak and defenseless, while its enablers stand guard to prevent anyone who comes to aid the weak, while trying to gaslight the world with tiresome refrains of Hamas headquarters in the basement of Al-Shifa Hotel, Al-Shifa Hospital. That was not true. And stage scenes showing nothing that the IDF described and confirmed by America's pretend fireman and Israeli propagandists. This was and is currently still the scenario. And that's one of those stage scenes happened to have been in the basement of the Al-Shifa hospital, where they had I think it was a laptop or something, and they had some sign on a bulletin board in Arabic, and they said it was some plan or whatever, and all it was, I think it was just saying the date of the month and whatever, but they figure, well, it's going, across the world to people who don't speak Arabic, so we say it, and because we say it and we are supremacists, they'll believe us, and they've been so used to, for decades, gaslighting the people in the West, and the disreputable media such as CNN and the rest of them will just bellow the smoke, and recite the propaganda. Nobody's gonna question the fact that what is that? That is staged. That's nonsense, right? It's not saying what they say it is. At this point, as was predicted and memorialized in January 2024 and recorded in the video and in the book Without a Speck of Gray, the black and white of truth and justice, the question was asked, who will bring Mr. Netanyahu to heel? Sounds like what they would say in the army, heel. We knew that we would arrive when I say with my guys, when we wrote, because I'm just the pen, right? I'm just the vessel. We knew that we would arrive at this point where there are regrets for the unconditional, unbridled support, the free rein given to the vampire that is revenge. With its bloodlust, that is a bottomless pit. And the raging out of control fire that is now consuming the world. This is history. And you don't need 4 eyes, really. If you study history, you know it would arrive at this. It's always been that way. There are countless examples down through the ages. Equal opportunity, all societies. This is nothing new. These souls should have known, those who enabled Israel. They should have known it would come to this. And, you know, they would look at people like me and maybe you and say, what do you know? You don't know anything about geopolitics. What the devil do you know? You know, we're nothing. We're stupid. We drink the Kool-Aid. Sometimes what they forget, and this is through the spiritual lens, many of us are wiser than many of them because of the different life journeys that we have had. And we're astute to human nature. We could guess all of this. Or we've done it, or we've seen it before. Some of us have been great military strategists, right? So all this stuff that's going on, sometimes we would look at the nonsense and we say, oh my God, what stupidity. Some of us might have been logisticians, part of military strategy. And when we see something like what happened in World War II, the nonsense, the lack of logistical planning that helped to defeat the Germans, the Nazis. But we would know because it is in us. So we don't have to be in a particular lifetime. And I'm going back now to reincarnation to know things. We don't have to have any PhD to know certain things because we've had many lifetimes of that experience. And I might say that, but please, I believe in education. I believe in education. At the same time, I will willingly say there are many educated dunces. They don't have well-rounded education and they can, you know, recite the book, but they do not know how to extrapolate. That in itself, that's not good either. And there are many of us who don't have a degree, but we could spin that PhD in many different areas, spin them around in circles, right? So if you can get an education, get it. But at the same time, don't underestimate someone who doesn't have a degree behind their name. Now, as I said, these souls should have known it would come to this. Benjamin Netanyahu and his gang are only showing us what history teaches us, that supremacist ideology and practices, when enabled and abetted, leads to never again moments. And we've had so many of them with Israel. And because they're aided and abetted by America, and it's knocking itself out, locked in this death spiral, the last gasps of its hegemony. Who will put a stop? It looks like only the universe now will be able to put a stop to Israel. We will see why this scenario is playing out the way it is from the spiritual perspective. as we look into the souls and the journey of those souls, they serve as living proof and testament of the truth that is reincarnation and its facts. Through the eyes of the soul, when countries, empires, and states become great powers, they, as I've said before, are infiltrated by souls on the lower rungs of the ladder of soul restoration who have come to partake of the harvest, not of the toil. They see this, and that's what we're seeing now. That's why it's so horrendous. They see this as the perfect opportunity, the opportune moment to truly gain power and control. To what aim? When we must leave this earth, I don't know. It is a denial of the spirit. Because if you value the spirit over the temporary human life, then you will know it is futile. We can't card it off. You know, you think of King Tutankhamun's tomb, Pharaoh. And all that was in there, including the golden chariots of Akhenaten and Nefertiti. And all of that. Can't take it to where he was going. Because the body is still there. But the spirit's long gone. That is what lasts. No matter what we do. So to what aim? To what aim do we commit all these spiritual mistakes? It makes no sense. If we could only understand that ancient knowledge that was from the beginning. Now, it is a denial of the spirit. That which is external to the prison of our five senses, and I've spoken about that. You can check my other videos. Our essence, who we truly are. And the pull of the material affinities, you know, just what is of the earth, that we die, are unalive, and we leave it. And we don't take it with us. And that causes this yearning. We become prisoners of our senses and hide or run away from our consciences, like John Kirby. He hid his conscience in the rose bush at the White House when he shed tears for the hundreds of Israeli civilians. And remember now, of that 1,149 people who were made unalive, hundreds of them were made unalive by the IDF and their Hannibal, or whatever directive they call it, where they do not want people to become hostages, so they make them unalive themselves. And he shed tears for those civilians. But there shouldn't be any civilians who should undergo any atrocity because they're not combatants. But he couldn't find a tear to spare, or even a drop of empathy in his cup for the tens of thousands of Palestinian children and babies, the hundreds of thousands made unalive or existing between the living and the dead, maimed for life. He couldn't find, and those are hundreds of thousands, he couldn't find not even a tear to spare or a drop of empathy in his cup for them. And as Joe Biden, and they call him Genocide Joe. And by the way, he was George Washington in another lifetime. And I go into that in one of my books, Volume 2 of Thoughts on the Past, and also in Yeah, just thoughts in the past. I don't think I went into it in two phases. When he was eating his ice cream cone, and he never thought about those Palestinian children and babies, that how nice it would be for them on a Sunday afternoon to be able to walk with their parents. They might not have enough money, but in Gaza, and enjoy that. Most kids love ice cream. He never thought about that. What was his remarks when they mentioned about all the people who were being made on a lie? He said, oh, well, those things happen in war. He was more concerned about how Bibi made him look by not doing what he promised. As previously discussed and ad infinitum, the mask which each of us wear, right? I should go back to this, okay? Now, we become prisoners of our senses and hide or run away from our consciences. I do get carried away talking. Some of us cede our free will to others. We let others control us. Those who lust for control, they will also deliberately take away the free will of others. Alas, prohibition and dictators, that's what they do. Take away people's free will. That's what prohibition is. Those who cede their free will are the followers, the sheep, mob of sheep, not flock, mob. As previously discussed, the mask which each of us wear more than one at any given time in our earthly journey are irrelevant. In this conflict, we see black female and black male as the representatives of America and act the policies of an immoral and amoral, and well, they are not in power anymore, as I said. Biden administration and its State Department, Pentagon, and National Security Council in reprehensible games of running out the clock that have cost the lives of tens of thousands of children and babies, and denigrating Palestinian women by saying that sexual violence inflicted on them by Israeli defense and security forces is not to compare to that inflicted on Israeli women by Hamas and other fighters. And we know that a lot of that is just bogus stuff that they put out there. Okay, not all, but a lot of it. We have souls masquerading in the masks of Hindu, Christian, Black, English, Canadian, American, Italian, female, conservative, labor, like Stammer, Democrat, Republican, Zionist, and Jew, helping to perpetuate the atrocities in this war. Right-wing and liberal. All of them. You think about the Democratic Party like a Schumer and a Cory Booker and a Hakeem Jeffries. And I'm calling out, like the black ones too. And the females. And all of them. Israel has a right to defend itself. Don't give a hoot about Palestinian people. Suffering does not ennoble. For example, a white labor Christian male, these are the masks, Keir Starmer, is no different from a brown Hindu conservative male Rishi Sunak or a black female conservative Christian Kemi Badenoch. And I end there. Thank you for visiting my channel once again. Please do not forget to subscribe, give a thumbs up for like, share, and leave a comment. And as usual, I like to end with this. None of us is without blemish. And although I appear harsh, and this one I have been rather harsh, I must deliver the messages as I get them. I must say what I must. What I do and the collective, as harsh as we sound, wish that all of us would do better and recognize that indeed we're all brothers, all of us, brothers in this brotherhood of man. If you prick me with a needle, I will bleed. And if I prick you with a needle, you will bleed. And if you do not give me water, especially water, I will be made unalive. And if I do not give you water, you will be made unalive. And every child belongs to all of us. Hate hitching a ride, hate a contagion, a cancer metastasizing, the cloud waiting to block the sun, hate waiting to hitch a ride on the train of love, hate the rat on its rat passage, hitching a ride on the boat to the plague, hate the bedbug waiting for our suitcase, hate the roach riding on our coattails, hate the shadow always lurking behind, sometimes longer than us, hate just lurking behind the thin curtain, waiting for its turn on center stage to take us to a place not so far away, a blast back from civilization to barbarism, from knowledge back to ignorance, from wisdom back to imprudence. Hate never takes a holiday, always looking for the opportunity to hitch a ride on the train of love. Hate inhabits the same house as love within us. None of us is without blemish. All of us live in glass houses, and we're all brothers in this brotherhood of man. None of us. God has no chosen few, and never gave unto any of us any chosen land. Once again, we're all tenants on this earth, not here to have dominion or to rule over anything or anyone. We're not here to have dominion over the fowl of the air, the fish in the sea, or the beasts in the fields. We're not here to rule and have supremacy over our brothers. Let us be good tenants. Let us take care of ourselves and of each other. And let us trod ever so lightly and take care of this planet, our temporary home that we call Earth, and all the creatures that dwell thereon. Remember that there is something that is greater than us. That's the fatherhood of God. And we love and respect that. Something that is greater than us. An omnipotent being. We cannot fight on behalf of that omnipotent being. We love and respect that, something that is greater than us, by taking care of ourselves and of each other and the planet and the creatures that dwell thereon. May we never try to flee our conscience so that we will always do correct actions. May we learn to walk a mile in our brother's shoes so that we can see the humanity in each other. May we respect the differences in each other and know that our Creator has no chosen few. May we find comfort in the knowledge that each of us is slated for redemption and none is excluded. May we find solace in the knowledge that it is not a question of if, but one of when each of us shall return to our Father. May we know that we are just tenants on this earth and take care of each other, the earth and all the creatures that dwell thereon. May we always adhere to the divine principles of the fatherhood of God, the brotherhood of man, doing unto others as we would have them do unto us. Love. That which I do unto my brother, I do unto myself. For I am my brother's keeper. And may the tiny shrouds of light forever illuminate our path through the dark. May peace forever reside within us and between us. One divine, universal love.